Hello everyone, my name is SiC. Welcome to a different video. I've done a few of these before, but today is, well, the first in a long time. I'm trying to improve on doing painting videos and so on. It's not going to be a super regular thing, but today I wanted to do something special. I wanted to paint up a bunch of British soldiers from Gecko models, and my goal here is to paint them all black. Which is kind of tricky because all black models, they don't have a lot of visual interest to them, you know, they can get kind of boring to look at. And so my goal here today is to see if I can get a visually interesting all black paint job, with of course the exception of the faces basically. And I have a few ideas for that. I wanted to do gloves in a kind of brownish black leather, so that is slightly different from the other black components. Hard plastics like knee pads, belt buckles and so on. I wanted to give them a kind of bluish tone, so they are still black but they are edge highlighted with a very desaturated blue tone. So all of these little things, like, they don't jump out at you in a super obvious way, but when you look at it, it's there. And finally I wanted to do a bit of weathering. These guys will be fighting in the desert, and as such I can do a little bit of dusty stuff, like dust on clothing and stuff and things like that. It fits the black uniform, it ties them into a base, and yeah, it provides them a little bit of color to the model that is going to predominantly be black. So let's see if I can manage to make this work. So what I want to try today is a relatively new technique that has been going through the internet a lot lately, called slap chop. Slap chop basically relies on dry brushing grays and whites over a black surface on the model to bring out all of its detail. Now it's very important here that you put paint on the brush and then you rub off most of it. So for this I am using an old makeup brush, and then I'm proceeding to just lightly brush over the model. And I'm doing this from the top to the bottom because, well, generally speaking, you know, the sunlight comes from above. So it makes sense for the lighter areas to be on the top side of the model, and that leaves darker recesses on the underside of the model in black. As you can see, this brings out a lot of detail already. It works really well. But we are not stopping there. We're going to take another color after this and we're going to repeat this process. Now you can keep going with this step as much as you like until you just feel good about it. There's no perfect moment to stop here, but you don't want to have too much paint on your brush and then just have everything become super smudgy on the model. That's the only thing you need to take care of here. Otherwise you just keep going. As you can see, it brings out all of the detail really well. Next up, I'm taking Ulfuan Grey and I'm going to repeat this process, except I am not going to do an all-over brush anymore. I'm going to use this paint only in like the top areas. I'm going to leave the lower areas in the old color a bit more. Basically, I'm reducing my amount of coverage over the model. I'm not dry brushing the whole thing, I'm just taking more select areas like the helmet, which would catch more sunlight, the tops of the arms, but not the bottom of the arms, for example. You could do the knees, the pouches, the tops of the pouches anyway, but I wouldn't use this paint below the pouches, because the idea here is to create a shadow effect, right? And shadows are not always super hard. Most of the time they're very soft, they're very gentle, they're not super obvious all the time. And this helps create this effect that there isn't a hard line of light, but there is a soft transfer, or how do you say that? There is a soft transition, is the word I'm looking for, from light into darker colors. So I'm just going all over the model with this. Well, not all over the model, but like I said, I'm going across all the parts that I think should receive extra light. So shoulders, the hand here, knee pads maybe, and so on. But I'm leaving the inside of the arms, the lower sides of the pouches, lower side of the arms, and so on. Next up is Ceramite White. I am repeating this entire process once again, but on an even smaller area. And with this I'm trying to catch really the harder edges. So this would be the edge of the backpack, for example, anything that really sticks out, maybe the edge of the helmet,
something like that is quite nice to catch, because these are rims, these would catch the most light or reflect the most light, or most of the light would bounce off of that. So these are things or areas that you can really target specifically, but don't go overboard with this. Like you see here, I'm doing the shoulders, I'm doing the edges of the backpack, I did a little bit of the helmet, and I'm just giving this, I'm going across the model wherever I think like would need the most light. Now this is the step that is the most important for this paint job. This is the part of the slap chop technique where you use contrast paint to cover over all the dry brushing that we just did. And for this I'm using a 50-50 mix of the contrast medium and black Templar, which is also a contrast paint. Now the idea behind the contrast paints is that they are very thin, but they still provide a strong color, and they kind of act as a 3-in-1 paint, basically. So in regular painting before, you would do a base coat with a solid color, let's say red, then you would wash that with maybe a darker color like black or brown into the recesses to create depth and shadows, and then you would highlight the hard edges with a lighter color, so a light red, so that, like for example, a knee or a helmet edge would really stick out, and that creates a lot of depth in the model. The contrast paints are designed to do basically the same thing, except all in one step. So they provide a good strong mid-tone for the vast majority of your model. They are going to run into the recesses and pull there in a darker way so that they create more shadow. And they are also designed to kind of run away from the hard, sharp edges so that the paint there will be thinner. And that will create a natural highlight. And so what we've done here with the dry brushing is we really play into the strengths of that paint, because we have already established so much light and so much shadow on the model with the 3 steps that we just did, that applying this paint over it is going to basically reinforce the effect of that paint really well. And what I'm doing here, I'm applying this mix of 50-50 contrast medium and black Templar contrast paint all over the model, all over the parts, all over the helmets. I do take care not to let it pool too much in some areas, like you can apply it too much and then it will still dry up a little bit weird. So you need to look out for those areas where it's a little bit too thick on there, a little bit too much. But other than that, I'm just going all over the model. And additionally, this all over wash also makes sure to basically tie in all the colors of the dry brushing together, so that it looks less dry and the transitions are a little bit smoother and it all just feels more natural looking. Now the reason I did a 50-50 mix is because it is quite a strong contrast paint, the black Templar, and I was worried that I might put too much, like it would overpower the dry brushing that I did and it would reduce the amount the effect that it would have. So you can always add more, like if this is not enough and it's not quite dark enough for your liking, you can just apply another layer and then you will get the result that you want. But if you put it on too strongly at the start, well, there's no going back anymore. Now this mix needs about half an hour left to dry, and that is what I did. But now I'm going back to the model with that same mix of 50-50 and I am going to reapply it to a few parts of the model, particularly the tactical vest and all the pouches that are on there, and I am going to apply it all over the backpack. Now the idea here is to simulate that they are a slightly different fabric. Maybe they're harder or more stern, but they are at least like slightly different fabric. And also, and maybe more importantly, is that it creates another element of visual interest on the model, because it's not all the same black. There's a different type of black, or a darker black. So when you look at the model, there are multiple different kinds of things that you can see, and that creates that visual interest. Next, I'm tackling the belt buckles and not the straps, but like all the little buckles and clips and things that are hard plastic. For this I am using a Baden black. This is a strong matte finishing black, and I am applying this over the parts that I want to be the hard plastic. Now the reason I'm doing this is to make them feel like they are different from the fabric because they are darker colored, but also again a different kind of black. It's matte but not too matte, like it is slightly reflective. And I'm just going all over the model and picking out all of these details. And yeah, you will see in just a second, like I'm taking a different model for here. I am doing this across the knee pad, for example. That is a hard plastic that should be different from the rest of the model. And by applying this, you can tell, like, again, this is a different kind of material, and it is another point of visual interest. And I'm going to go all across the model with this, going across belt buckles, like for example the tactical vest has 2 on the body. There are a couple of them on the backpacks and so on. So I'm just going around picking out all of these things. Right here I start the process of edge highlighting all of these hard plastics on the model. For this I am using Thunderhawk Blue. I actually did try a different one called Incubi Darkness, but it was too dark and it wasn't really quite showing enough. So I decided to go a lighter one and then highlighting this once again later on with an even lighter blue. So with this I am basically going across all these belt buckles and I'm trying to pick out the edges and not touching the center of these. So for some of the buckles it's a bit difficult because they're very small. So I just try to put in a few shapes that reinforce the overall look and shape of that part on the model. I then repeat that step using Rust Gray. I'm doing the belt buckles and all the hard plastics once again, but I'm not going across all the parts that I edge highlighted before. I am basically going for the corners, the sharpest edges, and yeah, basically those parts that would reflect the most light and that also reinforce the general shape of the object that I am painting. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned yet, but that is actually really important, it is to thin your paints. I actually should have said this at the start of the video, and I will put a notice there in text because it is really quite important. If you don't thin them down, first of all, they're going to dry quicker, they're not going to last as long, but most importantly they are going to be super strong on the model and they're going to overpower and destroy the effect that you're going for. And like I said before, it's always easier to add a little more than take something away. So you want to take this slowly and in steps. I then decided to move away from the uniform a little bit and paint the gun, because right now I've been staring at this model in black and gray tones for so long. Even with the clips, they don't make that huge of an impact yet, and I just needed something to show me that what I was doing was actually going to look cool. So I needed some different colors, some extra effects, and that's why I decided to move on to the guns. Now for this I am using Lead Belcher. It's a metallic iron colored paint. And again, I thin this down and I wick off some of it off the brush, because you also don't want to load up your brush too much, because it's going to clog up all the detail if you put too much paint on all at once. But basically I'm going across the weapon and I'm giving this 2 thin coats so I can get a solid color of metal. I am then giving this an all-over wash with Black Templar. This is again the contrast paint that I used before, and I'm watering it down with a tiny bit of water. I'm not using the contrast medium for this, because I wanted to try and see how much of a difference it really made for the look. And overall, for the metallics, a more shiny, reflective nature might be appropriate. So I just water it down a little bit, and then I'm going to give this an all-over wash across the L85A2 with Grenade Launcher or whatever weapon this is. Now this shows up quite dark, and it really again adds to that metallic or grayish tone that we are seeing across the model. So for right now it doesn't make much of a difference, but when we start dry brushing this, after this has dried, you will see this really starts popping up apart from the model. I got a little bit impatient with adding color to the models, so I figured I might as well add some texture paint to the base. And this also has quite a bit of drying time, so I figured along with the weapon I could apply this and then they could dry at the same time, and then I could move on at a slightly nicer pace in the future. So basically this is a texture paint. It has a bunch of extra, well, grain and other things in there, and basically it's supposed to look like sand. I am applying this all over the model, but I'm trying to do so in a very thinly and spaced out manner because I don't want this to look super chunky. I would like this to look like sand. So I'm spreading it out quite thinly so that it doesn't really look that chunky. And then it's time to dry brush the metallic gun. For that I am using Stormhost Silver. And it is important once again to basically get rid of most of this stuff off of your brush, because otherwise it is going to completely ruin the contrast paint already on there. So like I'm trying to get off as much as I can. For this I am using a smaller brush because I don't want to touch the arms, the head and so on. So it is one of my worst older paint brushes, so I don't really care too much about what happens. And I'm just rubbing this slightly back and forth across the model, and as you can see it starts picking out all the details. And I try to make sure here as well to take out all the, or pick up all the hard edges and make them a little bit more reflective than the rest of the gun. Now, in preparation for washing or oil washing the entire base later, I am taking Carrick stone here and I'm going to apply this all over the rocks on this base. It is slightly lighter than the texture paint, which suits me just fine actually. It's also goes to differentiate the rocks from the sand, like it's not all one color, and in the end it will look really cool. I'm applying 2 thin coats here so that they have a nice strong base color. Further desperation to get some more color onto this model, I decided to go paint the faces, and I really hoped here that this would make the model pop a little bit more, because right now it's just like the flat brown, which is very visually uninteresting still because we have more steps to go through, and all the black and gray, and just like a few tiny dots of blue paint. So with these models I really needed to trust the process. The starting stages always look ugly, so I needed to get something done here to make some visual interest for myself as well, to keep myself motivated to keep going. And for that I decided to paint the face. I'm using the model that is the most open in terms of pose, so I have good access and I can show you really well, but I'm thinning this paint down quite a bit because the facial features, they are very tiny and they are super easy to obscure if you paint on the paint very thickly. You really don't want to do that. So I am thinning that down to a very thin consistency, and then I am applying multiple coats, like at least 2, but up to 3 or something like that, before I am left with a base coat on the face that I'm happy with. I then do an all-over wash of Reichland Flesh Shade. This is a flesh-colored, obviously, oil wash, or maybe not an oil wash, but it is definitely a wash paint. And I'm applying this all over the face, making sure it doesn't pool too much in the recesses, because then it also looks horrible. Like it needs to be there, but it doesn't need to be too thick. And like I said, you can always add more, but you cannot remove what is already there without ruining your whole paint job. So it's better to thin it down a little bit if you want, if you're really scared about overdoing it, and then applying a second coat. But for me, always the first, I just use it straight out of the pot and it works really well. Now, just like the contrast paint, it needs quite some time to dry, at least like half an hour. So I'm taking this opportunity to also do an all-over wash with Agrax Earthshade on of the base. So I have a bigger brush for that, and I'm taking it from the pot and I'm just applying it all over. Now this brush was old and it's a bit dried out, so it took a little while for it to absorb the paint properly, but after a while it got supple again, soaked up more, and then I just applied it all over as thickly as I want. In this stage we don't really care about soaking up too much into recesses, and in fact on bases it might actually look better. With all that dry, it is time to start highlighting the face, and for that I am using Cadian Flesh Tone. Now with this is actually a layered paint, and it is designed to show through a little bit of the layer underneath, but in order for it to be able to do so, you need to thin it down properly. So that is what I'm doing here. I'm adding quite a bit of water to the mix, so that it is not too thick, and then I can apply it in multiple stages. The first one is going to look horrible because it is very translucent, maybe a bit streaky even in appearance when you first start applying it, but just keep going, keep it thin, wait for it to dry, that is very important, and then just apply a second coat, and eventually you're going to build up a nice strong color. Now what I'm doing here is I'm not doing this all over. I am going to do things like the nose, the eyebrows, the forehead, but then I am leaving a tiny bit of space between the eyebrows and the forehead so that the darker color remains in place there. And that creates kind of like a furrowed look for his face. Similarly, I want to do the lips, and then I'll leave a little bit of space beneath the lower lip before painting the chin. And I'm just leaving a little bit of all the darker areas, like where the nose connects to the cheeks. I am ignoring that part a little bit as well, so that the nose stays as a separate looking entity almost. Like I try to get very close to it, but I try to leave like a little line, because if you paint everything in the same color again, like then you lose all depth in the face again, and you just don't see the details that well, and for a miniature that is quite important. Next, I repeat that process using Kislev Flesh, which is a lighter skin tone, and I am going to apply this in the same way, very thin down, but in smaller areas than before. So when I'm painting the face here, I'm not painting the whole bridge of the nose, I'm just painting like half of the nose. I am painting the cheekbones, and I am picking out the chin, but leaving the lips, for example, or maybe just paint the lower lip, the eyebrows, all of these extruding parts of the face that would catch more light than the other parts. And this really helps to create a sense of depth. With the faces done, I am going to move on to the leather parts, and for this I am using Skaven Blight Dinge, which is a very desaturated dark brown. Almost grey, but just with that hint of brown to it. I'm going to basically apply this across the boots as well as the gloves that he is wearing. I am going to leave the deepest recesses with black, but I am going to paint over that all the other parts with the Skaven Blight Dinge. It's going to kind of be hard to tell at first, but it is going to create a small tonal differentiation and will help set apart those materials from the rest of the model. I am then doing what I did for the face. I'm taking a lighter layer paint called Storm Vermin Fur, and I'm going to apply this to select areas on the hands and the boots. I'm basically doing an edge highlight for things where I can, and I'm picking out things like the knuckles or like the joints of his fingers, maybe like a leather strap of the glove, the laces on the boots, and so on. Like all of these things, basically stand out or need to stand out more than the rest, and that also shows like, hey, you know, the guy has knuckles. That has like, there's depth to it. In the end, that didn't quite do it for me. It wasn't quite, it didn't quite pop. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding a little bit of Rakarth Flesh to the mix, basically turning it into a 50-50 mix of that and Storm Vermin Fur for a slightly brighter color. And then I'm reapplying highlights on the knuckles, on edges of straps, on the boots and the shoelaces and so on, so that they pop a little bit better. With that, the model itself is now complete, and it is time to finish the base. I'm going to go back to Karak stone here, which is what we used to do the stones before washing it with Agrex's Earthshade. So I'm making sure to take off most of the paint off the brush, and then I'm slowly and softly rubbing the brush back and forth across all the rubble, all the rocks, and across the sand as well. I also use this paint to weather the model a little bit. I want to make it look like this guy has been in the combat zone for a while, so that he has like it looks like he's been active. So I'm doing a stippling technique. Basically, I'm not dry brushing anymore, but I'm just pushing the brush at the model rather than going back and forth. I'm doing this very lightly, and I'm doing this across the knees and the elbows. And the idea is that, you know, they got shaded with dirt, you know, or like with dust that got soaked up by the fabric. And that's because he was crawling around in the floor on all fours or something like that, or just kneeling to take a shot. It just ties him to the base a little bit better. On top of that, it adds a little bit more variation to the paint job as well. It makes the black a little bit more unique. I want another tone to the base as well, so I'm going to use Shapti bone, and I'm using this to dry brush over the base. Particularly the stones, they could use with a little bit more brightening up to make them pop a little bit better. This is quite a bit brighter than the other paints that we've used before, so I am making sure to really rub off nearly all of it, so I don't overdo the effect. And then I'm going to go all over the base in kind of patches, and I'm going all over the stone to make all of that pop and to add some tonal variation. Now, the bases still look quite dead, so I decided to add a few tufts of grass. For this I'm using Middenland tufts, and basically I'm picking out one that I like. I have a variety of sizes here, though you can see I already used up most of the mid ones. And yeah, I'm taking off one of these with a plier. I have my glue ready, and I have a little toothpick, I guess, ready to press this into position. And a final bit of cleanup, I use some Steel Legion drab here to paint the rim of the bases. You can use whatever color you like, but I feel these would really tie them into a desert map quite well. And with that, the models are complete and they are ready to breach a building. I'm super happy with how they turned out. I'm quite... I wasn't entirely sure about how the black would come, because it could read as grey rather than black. And that is always the trick here with the dry brushing, and you need to use the grey to make black pop. After all, there is nothing blacker than black, and you need that black for the shadows, basically. If you don't have that in the shadows, you're going to invert the color and it's just going to look horrible. It just doesn't work. So the shadows need to be black, but then you need to do highlights with something lighter, like gray. And if you do that too much, it's going to just end up looking like a gray uniform. But in this particular case, with the slap chop method, I think I did a really good job of making this look like black cloth. So I'm super stoked with the result. I hope you liked it as well and that this was useful for you. And if so, please do leave a like and a comment below if you enjoyed this content and wish to see more. And I will see you guys for whatever video I do next.